Mr. Stephen Nichols is a licensed mental health counselor associate and is nationally board certified. He's currently a PhD student in counselor education and supervision at the University of the Cumberlands in Kentucky. His primary research interest is in suicide cognition, and he holds a doctoral level membership as a suicidologist with the American Association of Suicidology. Mr. Nichols has been published and holds professional honor society memberships in both psychology and counseling. He is the clinical director at Family Service Association of Howard County, and Mr. Nichols is also a veteran who experienced profound mental illness and homelessness for about a decade. So needless to say, he has an academic, professional, and personal interest in this very important work. Please help me welcome to the stage, Mr. Stephen Nichols.
Wow, I'm kind of awed by myself. That's quite an introduction. Albert Einstein used to travel to different conferences to give presentations. And a lot of people don't know this. In his older years, he used to do that quite a bit, and he really hated it. He didn't like public speaking. He got tired of giving the same presentation over and over. And he had a chauffeur that he was very close to, and his chauffeur, knowing that he hated these presentations, said, "Hey, why don't I do it for you? I've been to every one of these presentations. I've heard them over and over again. I bet I could give your presentation." So with a little gray wig and a little gray mustache kind of disguise, the chauffeur took Einstein's place for about 2 years. A lot of people don't know this, and gave these brilliant presentations, just repeated everything he had heard. And of course, you know what inevitably happened is they were at a conference and Einstein was sitting in the audience, and the chauffeur was up front and giving this brilliant presentation, and some jerk professor in the audience had to raise his hand with a question. So I know this is a very complex subject, but I have a question. Then he launched into something about theoretical physics. And the chauffeur, being very quick-witted, said, "You know, that question's not so hard. My chauffeur could even answer it." So for those of you who are expecting a presentation about mental health and homelessness, I'm just going to stand up here and do some stand-up because I'm really not prepared. So in keeping with the theme of what's next, I'd like for each of your organizations to consider a program that we've started in Howard County. And that program is focused on mental health. And how many of you that work with homelessness run into people where you have to run into issues of mental health? By show of hands. I would imagine it's almost everybody. Mental health is closely correlated with homelessness. There are plenty of studies that show that our homeless population in large part has a mental health problem. And to make clear, that doesn't mean that we're talking about someone who's hearing voices or who's seeing things. Mental health can be addictions problems, which I know a lot of us run into. It can even be the angry client that comes into your office, starts yelling and screaming, and you're like, wow, that person's just really angry. Well, no, that person may have had a trauma history or may have some reason for being real angry that we just don't clinically see. There's a large population of people needing mental health services that are also homeless. And so we encounter those people and we're like, well, now what am I going to do? What do I do with the person that comes in, has a session with me, and then I never see them again because they're just very impulsive and they're bouncing from place to place? What do I see a person whose behavior isn't terribly appropriate, and it makes it very hard for me to get through the process with that person? So before I talk about my program, I just want to talk about the mental health system in general. For those of you that don't know, it's broken. It's pretty badly broken. It's probably not cool for a person who's a counselor to be standing up in front of everyone and saying, we really suck at our jobs. We don't, it's not being bad counselors, it's just our system is badly broken. And when I say our system is broken, I look at 4 different metrics. Number one, Has anyone here tried to get someone into mental health services, whether prescription, therapy? About how long is the wait to get the person in? Can someone throw out some numbers? Okay, it's not my fault. Typically the wait in my community, I've seen it anywhere from a month to 6 months. So as someone who's experienced profound mental illness before, I can tell you where I was at with my mental health was if I went to someone and asked for help and they said, we'll see you in another 6 months, I'd be dead, right? That's just not acceptable. It's not acceptable that people, boy, if that person needed physical help, if they had a broken leg or they had an arrow through their throat or something, they'd get into the emergency room right away. But because it's mental health, we kind of let people go. So that's the first metric that I'm concerned with, is how soon can we get someone to help? And then the second problem is when they finally do get in to get help, how often are they being seen? The industry standard for counselors, social workers, psychologists, a person should be seen once a week. If they're in crisis, you might see them twice a week. Anybody here, again, just speak out. How long do people have between sessions that you know of that might be your clients? Okay, 3 months. Wow. So I was thinking 6 weeks is pretty awful. I'm working on a doctorate in how to teach counseling to be at the professor level, but the terminal degree for counseling is at the master's level. I'm already a counselor. I've already got my license. And I can tell you right now, therapy does not work if there is if there's too long of a period that the person isn't internalizing what they're getting during that session. Every 6 weeks, every month, let alone every several months, there's no internalization there. I was going to take a job with the prison system until I found out that they're only seeing their clients like every 3 months. And I thought that's not counseling. That's not therapy. I can't ethically take part in that. The third thing is, how expensive is it? How much access do people have? I'm going to make an assumption. I hope this isn't implicit bias, but I'm going to make the assumption that because people are homeless, they probably don't have a whole lot of money. They're probably not insured, or if they are insured, there's a chance that the place they'd like to go to for mental health help doesn't take their insurance. Or we have to go through this whole insurance process of getting them insured. You know what happens if you go into an emergency room? They fix the emergency. Let's figure out the payment later. We don't do that in mental health. That's not acceptable. And then the fourth thing is how effective is the mental health treatment? So while I'm kind of digging on my, gosh, I hope there's no one here from the Indiana Counseling Association. I just threw my career away. But a great way to measure the effectiveness of a therapist. I often have people come to me, they had seen a therapist for maybe 5 or 6 years. And my question is, why so long? Well, I really liked my counselor. It's like, I really like the guy that works on my car too. But if I leave my car there for 5 or 6 years, something's not being done. So there's an ethical imperative, and I'm speaking as a counselor, but I'm sure these things carry across to social work, psychology. There's an ethical imperative that we're supposed to get the person to independence. And I'm sure that's how it is with homelessness too. You don't want your person in your system year in, year out. You want to get them to the point that they can take care of themselves, that they can go out and do for themselves. And it's the same in counseling. On the one hand, is our Anthem person here? Good. One problem with the insurance system is they often tell us you've got 6 sessions to fix this person, or you've got 8 sessions to fix this person. And that's on the low end. On the other hand, you have counselors who will say, gosh, there's no time limit. As long as this person's paying me, as long as we seem to like each other, we can keep going. And that's just not ethical. You should get your person to get themselves to the point where they don't need you anymore. The best thing I ever hear in a session, I know this sounds corny, but I really mean it, is when they say, I don't need you anymore. Great, we win, right? Those are the 4 metrics that I look at. The one metric I gave there for therapists is therapist probably isn't that great if they're seeing that person month in, month out, year in, year out. There's going to be exceptions. Sometimes there's very complex cases, but for the most part, you shouldn't be going that long to your therapist. You should be getting some resolution before then. If you're seeing a psychiatrist, and this is what I was told from a good friend of mine who's a psychiatrist, the way to know if a psychiatrist is really doing a great job or not is if you've been on the same medication, the same dose, the same everything, and you're not getting better, that's probably not a good sign. A good psychiatrist should be tweaking your medications, getting you to the point that, hey, this didn't work. Let's lower this. Let's raise this. Let's add this. Let's take this. They see you now. They may only see you every 3 months because they need time for the medication to get hold and do some assessing. And a lot of people give psychiatrists an unfair rap because they say, well, the guy only saw me for a few minutes and sent me on. As a therapist, I like to say that person's staying in his lane. He's focusing on the medication. He's not getting in the way of the therapy and doing that. Psychiatrists actually don't get any training in therapy. And there are some exceptions where you can't blame the psychiatrist. So for instance, if a person has a condition, maybe an advanced type of psychosis where you're not going to really change the medication, you're not going to get much change, you're just going for the best stabilization you get. That's understandable. And as we all know, probably not even working in the mental health system, but just working around mental health, a lot of people don't stay on their medication, right? They're not compliant with their medication. So the psychiatrist gets blamed, and then you come to find out, well, I only take this when I need it, or I haven't taken it for a while, and then the psychiatrist gets blamed. So sometimes it's not on the psychiatrist. But again, those 4 metrics, whether it's medication intervention or whether it's therapy, how soon is the person getting in? Number 1, how often are they being seen? How expensive is the service and how effective is it? So what I'd like to do is to talk a little bit about the program that we have at Family Service Association. About a year ago is when I started with Family Service. And about a year and a month ago, I was giving a presentation at Jackson Street, which is a veterans homeless kind of, Angie would know the exact term for it, but it's basically a homeless or veterans home kind of facility for veterans who are literally homeless. And I was giving a presentation there based on how to de-escalate someone who is schizoaffective because they have a client who has that issue, and it's really hard for the staff. In fact, I'd given the same presentation a year earlier, and they said, could you come back and give it again because he's acting up again. So I was giving the presentation, and Angie was there, and also Tracy Martino, who runs Family Service Association. And I'm not sure this is true, but allegedly Tracy turned to Angie or turned to someone and said, we're going to get that guy to come work for us. And it was just really a marriage made in heaven, because I was sitting there thinking, I need a residency for my doc program. I would really like to work here. So when Angie and Tracy came over to me and they introduced themselves, I started a little 30-minute spiel about, I'm working on a doctorate program and I'd like to be able to provide, and they're like, oh yeah, sure, come on in. And it was just like that quick. It was wonderful. But here's what's special about the program. The program's not about the services that I provide. The way this program works is my job is to supervise interns. So we bring interns in. They can be counseling interns, they can be social work interns, and they come in and they're on an internship that's on a clinical track where they're supposed to be providing therapy, and they just need somebody to supervise them. So with some schools, you have to have a social worker supervising a social work intern. And so we have a social worker from another place that comes in and gets that state minimum hour to do that for professional identity purposes. But basically what we do for all the veterans out there is called force multiplication. You send one person behind enemy lines and they raise up an army of hundreds. So my job is to go in, supervise interns, and those interns go and see the clients that we have from our various programs. Our programs include a domestic violence shelter, the veterans home facility, a program called Healthy Families. We do some assessments for DCS. There's just really too many programs to even name. I'm not even sure I'm familiar with all of the programs. And we even set up, I was talking to our HR person and found out that our employee assistance program, does anyone want to take a guess on what the wait is to get an employee in to get some help if they need it? Ours was 6 months. So I was like, well, okay, if it's not someone I'm working closely with, I can see them. If it's like upper management or something, an intern can see them. And so some of my clients now are even employees. What's amazing about our program is if you go through the 4 metrics, and this period that I'm going to talk about was just one intern and me, just the 2 of us. How soon were we able to see people? Well, we not only saw people within our own program, word gets out to the community and people start referring people to us. How soon do we see people? To a person, same day or next business day. If you come in late on Friday, the latest you'll get in is on Monday, but you'll probably get in that Friday. How often do we see our clients? We see them weekly. In one case, I had a client who was in real trouble, not enough to maybe be IDO to the hospital, but just enough that I was pretty worried. We were able to see her every day. How expensive is it? It's free. Not one of our clients pay for our services. And how effective is it? So measuring self-surveys from clients, and we're pretty hard on ourselves. If someone leaves therapy, they don't complete the course of therapy. Let's say they, if you work with a domestic violence shelter, a lot of people come and then they flee and they go away. We just assume that that's a negative mark. And so that's how we record it. And we're still in the 90th, for measurements for how we're using stats. I don't want to talk over anyone's head, but we're in the like 90th level as far as how people feel about our services. We also don't discontinue services when they discontinue services with us. So if somebody goes off and they get their home or they get into a community or they get somewhere, so long as they're not in a place where we can't do telehealth over the internet, there's restrictions on different states people go to on what you can do with that. But we continue to see our clients. We've only had one client that we had to discontinue seeing, and that fell within our ethics range for the counseling for the state board. And when a person starts making threats, in that case, we can discontinue, but we can at least give them references to other places. What makes us different? How are we different in our approach? Well, for one thing, we don't pay our interns, and the interns are okay with that. A lot of interns, it's been my experience, they'd rather have a great experience than get paid. Not everyone, and that's entirely fair. I understand if you're a master's student and you just really don't have the funds and you'd really rather work in a place where you're getting paid. But I also know anecdotally that a lot of my peers were people that would complain about the place they were working. They're telling me how I have to do therapy. They're dictating hours that interfere with my school, or they do this, or they do that. Ours is what we call, there's a counseling theory called client-centered. And so the leadership theory we have for our interns is also called person-centered. But basically, we assume that the people we're getting from the schools are already professionals. The schools have already attached their name with that student. They're approved by the state to work under someone's license. They may be a little bit new, but they're not incompetent. They're good at what they do. And so what I do is I bring the interns in, kind of get a feel for how confident they are. Some interns are going to feel like, I've never done this before, I'm terrified. And others are like, I've been going to school all this time, I'm just eager to get out there, throw me in. And you just, it's like a good leadership practice in a company. Bring in the best people that you can and let them do their job. Don't feel like you have to overlook them. And most people in this room, we may have a couple of clinicians in here. And I'll get to what to do for supervision, how to bring in a supervisor to work with interns. But it's a very good system. The interns set their own hours. They have their own office. If they need me, I'm there, because unlike most places they're going to go to work at, I'm there 24 hours a day just for them. I'm not also doing other things on the side. You know, if you go to work for a hospital, community mental health agency, your boss may be available or they may not be. My number one job is to supervise those interns. And the way you can bring in somebody to do this, so in my case, I'm a student, I need a residency where I supervise interns because my degree is going to be in counselor education and supervision. But let's say that you have your place that you work at and you'd like to have a mental health component to it. One of the things you can do, and this is a great sales pitch, go to a local counselor or go to a local clinical social worker and say, how would you like to make maybe $30,000 a year and put in maybe 5 hours a week work? I put in full-time work at my job just because it's my residency. That's an obligation I have to my employer. But let's say I move on someday. Let's say I go teach at a university and they need to replace me. Most people that work in the mental health field work side jobs. So maybe they see clients from Monday through Thursday, and then on Friday, they go to the local hospital and they run a group, and they're billing like 12 people for just 1 hour. And that fifth day of the week kind of becomes your vacation money. I have a friend who's a counselor, and he's an adjunct professor some of the time. I had a professor who worked on the side as a counselor. I knew a psychologist who had clients most of the week and then spent part of the week providing testing services for places where there were just counselors and social workers where they couldn't do more advanced testing. A lot of counselors and social workers are looking for side gigs. So my agency, I'm just going to be open and fully disclose, pays me way less than what I'm worth, but that's okay. That's the deal I made with them. I need this residency. And so I'm willing to work for $30,000 a year to supervise maybe between 4 and 5 counselors. Think of the bang for the buck that you get from that. Let's say that you have 4 students that if they were counselors were making, let's say on the low end, $60,000 a year. And then you add me in as $60,000 a year. That's about $250,000 that you're getting for $30,000 a year. If you can get that one grant to pay a part-time clinician to come in and provide that supervision, like I said, we did it with just myself and one intern. That was kind of a practice intern. And then in January, we're going to start with our first batch of interns. There was a talk earlier that I heard where they were talking about different services not talking to each other. There's social services over here. There's mental health over here. There's law enforcement over here. Again, not beating up on my profession, but instead of sending your people to the mental health profession, consider bringing the mental health profession to where you work. Have your own therapist on board. That therapist can do public speaking for you. Not necessarily the best, but pretty good. Your therapist can do consultation. Hey, we're having a problem with this client. Can you advise us on that? They can advise you on state regulatory issues, on best practices in dealing with people that may have mental health issues. And we talked earlier in a panel about people with lived experiences too. I want to put in a plug for that. So from a time saving, money saving, helping as many of your clients as possible, I'd really advocate that you consider finding a therapist who is willing to do supervision, and let that person speak to area universities. There's always plenty of interns to go around. I also want to share some of the weaknesses with our program because no program is going to be perfect. So here's some of the things that we've had to work through and try and figure out. One of those is sometimes prescriptions go hand in hand with therapy. My worldview, coming from a counseling worldview, is we want to avoid medication if we can. We want to try and fix someone through their cognition, through their emotions as much as possible before we get to the point that we use medication. But the truth is there are just some conditions that you can't treat without medication, and that's the primary treatment. And there's other conditions where the person is struggling enough that they really need the medication so that they can even respond to the therapist. In such a case, I'm facing, wow, I can't get someone in for 3 months, or I can't get someone in for 6 months. Some of the solutions we've come up with, I don't know if everyone's familiar with Project Access. They recently moved into our building. They're not a part of our programming, but they provide everything from wheelchairs to medications for people that aren't able to afford those kinds of things. Project Access, as far as I know, is a statewide program. That's someone that you can get in touch with. Sometimes they're not only able to help with the funding, but they have connections with people where they might be able to get someone in quickly. Another advantage to having someone on your staff who's a clinician is that person may know other people in the mental health community. So I'm always trying to work with psychiatrists or psychiatric nurse practitioners to try and help get us in a little bit earlier to go ahead and help us with getting medications. And then you can also partner with allies. One organization I'd really like to speak well of is the Bowen Center. I approached them about what we could do. Actually, Cindy, I think, connected us. Yeah. And one of my concerns was most places we work with, it's very territorial, it's very profit driven. And it's like, well, we'll see your person, but we have to take over their therapy. We have to provide all of the holistic services. I was pretty impressed with Bowen Center because they said, look, if your person needs case management, give us a referral. We'll just handle the case management side. If you need the prescription side of things, we have people that can just handle that. Not always necessarily very quickly, but a little bit quicker because we have that relationship form. A great way to build a relationship in the mental health community is to have your own mental health person on staff. And then the other program, very similar to the first, is case management. So my role is very limited. I just do therapy. It would be going out of my role to try and get a person housed. It would be going out of my role to try and help them get their bills paid. And that's the great thing about working at FSA, because I'm surrounded by people that do that kind of case management work, and they can take care of those kinds of things. But sometimes a person really needs intensive, near constant case management. Again, there's several ways to handle that. Now that you've got a good relationship with the university because they're providing you with interns, maybe they'll want to provide you with a social work intern at the bachelor's or master's level that can focus on those case management needs. You can get those case management interns. My solution, like I said, is to go in-house. And again, partnering with allies. So again, the Bowen Center is one that's come up. Full disclosure, I've never worked for them. They've just been really good to me. But they are, again, people willing to provide that case management. Some of the other benefits that you get is if any of you have facilities like shelters, DV shelters, veterans homes, the kind of things I'm at least familiar with, it's really nice to have someone who's on call 24 hours a day. Have any of you ever faced having to get someone to the emergency room? They don't take the person, or the police doesn't take the person. So if you have your own clinician, your clinician can step in and say, I want this person transported to the hospital. You can't override the physician at the hospital and what decision they're going to make, but that person can also explain to your staff, look, you and I both know that we're worried about this person, but as a professional, I realize the hospital's not going to take this person. You and I think that they should, but we're just not going to waste the police time because we're aware of that. But here's the things that we can do. That healthcare, that mental health care professional can also provide training for the staff so that you don't have to be afraid when a client starts talking about seeing things or starts talking about being suicidal or homicidal. You don't have to jump the gun and call for an emergency every time. You'll be able to know how to handle quite a few of those things. And if you don't, you have your own mental health provider right there on the scene. Consultation, in-house training. You can lend your counselor out to other organizations if they have a need and that counselor works for you. There's all kinds of ways that you can utilize a mental health professional if you want to bring them in. And again, it doesn't have to be an expensive proposition. A counselor or social worker that does this as a side job can come and provide these services to you. But more importantly, you can have that full-time in-house therapeutic help when that person brings in interns and provides supervision for those interns. So again, with those 4 metrics that are broken across the state, maybe across the country, I'm really focused on Indiana. Your organization doesn't have to suffer from those 4 metrics, and certainly your clients don't with this solution. So this is one possibility. I've only been doing this for a year, so there isn't a lot of longevity associated with this. But it has been something, at least anecdotally, that's been really successful so far. So I hope it's maybe something that you can consider, again, not only for your staff, but for your clients as well. So I figure I'm getting the 10-minute sign in the back, but I know a lot of folks are probably thinking, wow, this is the last talk. I wonder if this is one of those guys that like wraps up early so we can all go home early. Is Liz here? Oh, never mind. So does anyone have any questions? Yes. So the internship that we had was a social work student through Ball State. That internship ran from, I think, January 3rd through the last day of July. So that's also one of the things we're working at. We've worked really well with Ball State. They've already got names for us to start using again. One of the things we have to look at is who can we get for, the rest of the year, because of course we're going to want year-round coverage. Even working on my doctorate, I'm still able right now to carry a full caseload and still keep our metrics up, but gosh, it sure would be a lot easier to do that with interns. One difficulty with looking for interns is most programs, and including the program that I had gone through, it's the student's responsibility to go out and find a site. The school doesn't really do that. So I've sent letters out to different department heads for different counseling and social work programs. But what's most likely to get a program off and running is when you've had at least the first couple of interns go through. Everything in a program like this, from my experience, is word of mouth. People will say, this is the coolest place to work. Our supervisor took us out to lunch all the time, or, helped me out with some school issues, and there's side things you can sell on too, one of mine was, hey, I'm a doc student. If you need help with your APA writing, I can help you with that. If you're doing a research project in school, you can do that. Bring your homework to your job. If you're not actively seeing a client, you're not doing documentation, go ahead and knock yourself out. Do some homework. Yes. It really depends on what condition the person's dealing with. So if we were to ask an insurance company, it's anywhere between like 8 to 12 sessions, and they just basically cut it off and limit it. So you really have to work through that. If you're in private practice and you really have the time to do what you want to do, I would say anywhere from maybe 3 months to no more than 6 months. So the most highly functional, highly educated clients that I've had, where, you don't have to go through the whole speaking on the same level, they're at your level, they can internalize, they think about how they think. They realize that their disorder is something apart from themselves and not a part of who they are. Those typically run a lot faster. And so I've had OCD cases that clear up in 2 to 3 sessions. Depression takes a little bit longer and sometimes needs some medication to get going along with that. Again, if we throw insurance out and just say what I think is a good course of treatment, about 4 to 5 months, even for the most profound cases, that should work, especially if there's medication intervention. There's also a lot of people who, and here's a little bit of inside talk, there's counseling and there's therapy. So therapy is geared towards a disorder. Counseling is, hey, I just lost my job. I'm not doing great with this, or my marriage is kind of falling apart. I just need somebody to talk to. And those, I think, about 8 sessions, usually a person does pretty well. And I'm surprised, this was something I wasn't prepared for in my education, is some people just come in that first session, they connect with you, they feel heard, and they're like, you know what, I think I've got this. There's always going to be, you always have to be self-aware. If I have someone come in the first session, they don't come back, maybe it's something I did. So you want to be self-aware of that too. But I had a situation recently that caused me a lot of stress. And I went to my clinical supervisor, who's a counselor. And I was like, this is really stressing me out. This is causing some problems. I need to see him a few times. And I saw him once. And he was like, you're good. And I felt good. So it depends on the situation. Yeah. Anyone else? Well, thank each of you very much for the work you do. It wasn't my place to go into my personal history. It was mentioned earlier that I was homeless. I really even avoided shelters, so I was committed. So in fact, I haven't had a client that I've met who was committed more times to hospitalization than I was. And I was homeless for about 10 years. And, it was people like you and people that were in the mental health profession that are the reason why I'm not that smelly bearded guy talking to himself in some alley anymore. And I'm at the place where I'm at in my life now. And, you know, I think my family would even thank you because I'm alive today. So I'm so gracious to be here. And in closing, I've been to a lot of conferences. I've been to psychology conferences, counseling conferences, suicidology conferences. I'm really impressed by how this was organized. I'm impressed at the numbers. This is one of the larger, aside from a national conference, I think one of the largest conferences I've been to, and some of the friendliest people that I've ever met. So give yourselves a pat on the back for the work that you do. Thank you so much.